Sukihotu. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Dharma Dana series. This is another series of episode here in our BMV Facebook page. And this is on our Saturday night sharing session. So today we are very blessed to have Bhante Dr. Candana Thera to share with us on the topic of is Nibbana even possible in this age of cell phones? Please, at the same time, I would like to remind everyone to also subscribe to our BMV YouTube channel. And this live is also live in Theravada Buddhist Council of Malaysia page. Please let me invite Bhante right now to join us in the studio. Good evening, Bhante.
Good evening. Good morning for me.
Good morning. All right. So to introduce all of you to Bhante Dr. Chandana is a bhikkhu and a student of the Dharma for over 30 years. While teaching the Dharma for over 2 decades, Bhante Chandana has a doctorate in Buddhist ministry, as well as degrees in psychology, marriage and family counseling, and comparative religions. Bhante Dr. Chandana was born in Beirut, Lebanon, to an Armenian family. During the 17-year Lebanese civil war, as a child, he was seriously injured. This near-death experience with the symptoms of PTSD and physical disabilities incurred led to development of a keen interest in his mind to gain a better understanding of life's true purpose. As he later came to appreciate the Four Noble Truths as taught by Lord Buddha, especially given the constant presence of death, suffering, and impermanence at every corner of his life in Beirut. In 1995, he found his way to the College of Buddhist Studies, where he met the late Venerable Dr. Havampola Ratanasara, who introduced him to the Theravada Buddhist tradition and became his preceptor, giving him the name Chandana. Since then, he has been granted numerous recognitions, including that of Master of Dana. It was Venerable Dr. Ratanasara Mahanayakateru who encouraged Venerable Dr. Chandana to start teaching the Dharma over 23 years ago, when he was still an Upasaka. In addition to his academic and applied background in the Dharma and Buddhist studies, Bhante Dr. Chandana has extensive background working with patients as a clinical psychotherapist, having completed his degree and training in psychology and marriage and family therapy. We are also being licensed in the state of California, USA. Thus, in addition to being a university professor, Bhante Dr. Chandana has worked as a mental health therapist, specializing in the areas of mindfulness, relationship help, anger management, trauma, and PTSD. Currently living in Hawaii, USA, Bhante Dr. Chandana holds meditation retreats both in person and on Zoom with students from around the world focusing on mindfulness, metta, and vipassana, as well as helping introduce healthier ways to bring happiness in people's lives while reducing their suffering. For over 3 years now, Bhante Dr. Chandana has taken on the task of converting the Pali Nikayas into English by voice recording them and making them freely available online and to this end. He has been retranslating many of these suttas in order to make them more relevant to today's listeners and especially practitioners of meditation. Bhante Dr. Chandana's book on Buddhist mindfulness and lifestyle has been published and is made freely available by the Buddhist Mahavihara for free distribution. To this end, Bhante Chandana is currently also translating this work into Armenian. So today, Bhante will be here sharing with us with the topic on uh, the new age. Is Nibbana even possible in this age of selfhood? With that, over to you, Bhante.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vivian. I'm glad you joined us at the BMV as hostess. Um, Before we begin, let us do proper salutation to the Triple Gem. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhan saranang gacchami, Dhamman saranang gacchami, Sanghan saranang gacchami. The topic is, well, is Nibbana possible in the age of cell phones and AI? The short answer, it is. But in a world where novelties like technologies have become the very currency, the inventory, if you will, of one's assets, the measure by which a person or a country even is valued of how technologically advanced a country or a culture is, it has become quite difficult now, especially, to remember to just pause and breathe while taking in the fact that technologies do not necessarily mean cultural advancements. Whether we're talking about the person or a country doesn't make a difference. We need to place our faith in the right place, especially when the question is Nibbana even possible? So technology itself doesn't mean much other than fill some small minority of the human population's pockets with incredible amounts of money, giving them unprecedented control over a global population while keeping them in servitude. And that's basically what we understand as consumerism, where we have about 8 billion of us fulfilling that role of being the consumers. So we need to look at things in context, especially given the theme of today. Humanity today, perhaps more than ever, blindly is following whatever is dangled in front of it. And with the exponentially dwindling rate in our attention span, it is no surprise how the rate of discontent, the rate of depression, even suicide rates have been increasing exponentially. And a slew of other mental disorders are on the record high. And they're continuing to grow still, unfortunately. So technology, the way we have been handling it now, without moral or ethical backing to support it, to support its growth, is like children playing with fire, or like infants running around playing with loaded guns. So it is a very dangerous state of affairs that we're dealing with. So we have to first be very practical or pragmatic in how we're approaching the question, but at large, just looking at life the way it has been unfolding in the recent past, and especially currently, and how it will be unfolding further in the near future. So the question then comes in of how much virtue is there, because we cannot see Nibbana in a vacuum. We have to see it in connection to whether there is virtue or not in us, the person. We start from there. The Buddha was very clear about this when he established Sila as the very first step, the other two being meditation, mental cultivation, and wisdom to follow that. So these three work together. They're called the three trainings. You see, we have not yet evolved in our virtues to be able to manage what is bound to happen with technology and AI, artificial intelligence. Humanity today is moving from suffering to even more suffering, unfortunately. And what my parents used to call this running from the rain only to get caught up in a hailstorm. Not a pretty picture, right? So today we have a world, albeit more technologically advanced than, say, our ancestors just a few centuries or generations ago. Yet we cannot see around us a world that is free from greed, that is free from anger, and that is free from delusion. What the Lord Buddha called it, the kileshas. Lobha, dosa, moha. Especially the last one, delusion, which cause us to become even more irresponsible, both towards ourselves and towards humanity, or the culture, or the country, or the planet. So, in that sense, today we have the greatest need for the Dhamma, the greatest need for the Dhamma in our lives, and specifically to realize the truths that it provides for all those who seek it. That's why I really love today's topic, because it's addressing these questions, hopefully in a pragmatic way also. But coming back to the kileshas for a moment, much like the case has been with some irresponsible scientists who were led by the kileshas, who built the first atomic or nuclear bombs. Today's AI scientists and everywhere, and everyone eager to apply them, to use them in their daily lives, need to pause and take inventory of our moral and ethical values. Instead of just blindly introducing new technologies without supporting them with a lifestyle that has within it the backbone of virtue, to see whether our intentions are defiled or not, to look at the motives, the nature of our motives behind our desires, our actions. So that indicates the presence of responsibility before we unleash these so-called advancements into society, because it's a snowball effect. We don't know exactly what it leads to, but if we lead with an intention that is based on what is not kileshas, what is not greed, what is not hatred based, what is not delusion, then whatever will come out will be also wholesome. Even technologies can be wholesome or unwholesome, because it's just a tool, right? It's just a tool. I mention technologies because everywhere I see people putting so much credence into these outside sources, considering them as our new refuge, if you will. Leaning into things outside of ourselves, looking for safety and security outside of us. We need to pause. We need to realize that this kind of mentality or approach is nothing but the opposite of Dhamma, meaning it is adhamma. So we have to call it like it is. We shouldn't sugarcoat anything. The future depends on it. The future generations of human beings rest on this. Interestingly, though, this goes hand in hand with our intention or even wish to attain Nibbana. Because despite all the ignorance out there, Nibbana is as possible today as it was during the time of Lord Buddha. But we must be really honest about ourselves and our intentions, like I was saying earlier, and our seriousness in developing in our virtue. So we play a crucial role in this. Nibbana is not a place that we go to. We book a flight or a ticket to go to in time and space somewhere in the future. It's not like that at all. It starts from where we are right now, and it starts with what we want to do about it and what we can do about it. So it is supported by how we Start living this moment, starting from there. Is there the backbone of virtue in my actions? Remember the first thing I said in the beginning. Is Nibbana, my seeking of Nibbana, supported by my seeking to improve my state of wholesomeness in my mind? Which means, is there sila? That has to be there. So first, I must add that the experience of Nibbana doesn't have much to do with our intellectual endeavors in pursuing it either. Sometimes people say, oh, I need to read all the suttas, or I need to research it, I need to look all, what is out there in talking about mindfulness, this and that. No. You don't have to, that's what I'm trying to say. Those are not the things that will take you to Nibbana. They will give you an idea, of course, that's wonderful. In fact, the more intellect and gathering of information you have, the more you have hoarding of ideas, the further it will become Nibbana. It simply won't work, because that too would be pursuing Nibbana out of greed. I see this sometimes in students. They want it, they want it, they want it, they want Nibbana. And I ask them, why? They have no clue. Because many people are talking about it, they're reading about it, so I want that too. Yes. Everybody wants to go to Paris? Well, I want that too. Well, that's not a good reason. Enough of a reason, anyhow. So we need to move away from our modus operandi, our manners of control, our desperate need to have even the semblance of control, actually. Similarly, when we mix and match traditions, ideas, trends, and expect somehow Nibbana to take place within us, I'm sorry, but that too will not work. If we want Nibbana to take place, then we must go back to the original teachings of Lord Buddha, plain and simple. There's been too many corruptions and distortions of Lord Buddha's teachings that we have basically today every imaginable mix under the sun claiming itself to be the Dhamma. We often come across these so-called quotes by the Buddha, for example, claiming things that we never hear or see Lord Buddha expressing in the suttas. All these are misrepresentations of the Dhamma. So we can't, it's not a salad bowl. We can't just keep adding things from this or that, whatever, and say, oh yes, that's going to take me to Nibbana. No, it's not. So before we look at the possibility of experiencing Nibbana, we must first make a full stop and look down and around us to see where it is that we are standing. What teachings am I following, basically? Here we need to have the clear-cut understanding that whatever teachings or instructions we're following need to be based on, as I said, the original teachings as we find them in the Pali Suttas, the earliest teachings. Of course, we must also acknowledge that not long after Lord Buddha's Parinibbana, after his death, 100 years later, approximately, there were already so many schisms and breakups happening within the Sangha, within the community of his disciples. So that's how we ended up getting, roughly speaking, the Mahasangikas, which later on became the Mahayana, and Sautrantikas, and whatever ended up being Theravada, basically, without getting into too much technicalities. So in a sense, we have lost the teaching, the tradition, 100%, but that's the nature of anicca. But the Pali Suttas still hold within them the closest teachings that we can find of Lord Buddha. And so we need to utilize our sense of discernment while we approach what I call the original teachings. So fortunately, we have the pillars of Emperor Ashoka, which clearly delineated 300 years later, after the Buddha's death, as to what were the Dhamma. What was the Dhamma? Where was it encapsulated? What were the volumes, if you will? So here in the pillars, we have the 5 Nikayas specifically being named. None of the other stuff that came later, like the sutras and this and that, and different traditions, Mahayana, Vajrayana, none of those things. Those were much later. So we need to know, when we're talking about Nibbanic experience, what it is that we're looking at, the teachings. So as a Theravadan bhikkhu, that is the area that I can speak about, which is the Theravada teachings, and specifically the earliest part of Lord Buddha's dispensation, the earliest part prior to that 100 years, I mean. So we need to look at our understanding of the Dhamma when we're talking about Nibbana. But that effort should also be done with much scrutiny, as I said, discernment, examination. We must know where we're looking. I used to teach science for over a decade in junior high and high school, and I would always encourage people to ask questions. It's no different when we're on the path, and when we're looking for the path, even, especially, to identify. Am I just following something emotionally? Am I doing this, integrated way of thinking? Am I falling into that trap, putting them all in together? Oh yes, a little bit of this, a little bit of Vedanta, a little bit of Hinduism, a little bit of New Age nonsense, a little bit of this, and then some Buddhism, some this and some that, and I'm good. That's not going to definitely take us to Nibbana. So we need to look where we're looking at before hoping to find what it is we're trying to find and taste, namely liberation. So there was once an old man, his name was Nasruddin, and this comes from the Caucasus, where my ancestors, Armenia, are from. So there was this man who, he was a funny little legendary character. Some say he never existed, but nevertheless, we have his image popping all over the place, especially when wise people wanted to say something to the community. So one day, they say, this Nasruddin character is outside looking, scurrying around, really panicking on the street. So his fellow neighbors, villagers come and say, Nasruddin, what is it? What is it? What are you looking for? And he says, oh, my wife lost her ring, her golden ring that I gave her. And everybody starts jumping in and everybody's looking for the ring. And after they spend about a few hours, actually most part of the day, looking, and one person goes to him and says, where did you lose the ring? And he says, oh, I lost it inside the house in the kitchen. And they say, what? You've had us look for it on the street. And he says, yeah, but here there's some light. Over there it's dark. You see? He was looking out on the street for the ring that he lost way back into the house, in the kitchen, which he saw was too dark. So I wanted to share that image with you because it very much reflects the inconsistency of our desire to attain Nibbana and where we are looking. So in a time period where it's all about how things must make us feel emotionally, we come to see whatever we think to be valid simply because how it makes us emotionally feel about it. So we've termed that as our valid form of knowledge. But this won't do. The Dhamma is all about wisdom, compassion and loving kindness with wisdom, awareness with wisdom, mindfulness with wisdom. So you do see the common denominator here, right? Wisdom. So that has to be there all the time. We must take a much closer look at, do I have the inclination of bringing in all these spiritual paths and considering them to be the same and leading us to the same place? which I hear sometimes. I've even heard some Buddhist teachers, even some in robes, say this, which is quite unfortunate. Not all paths, spiritual paths, take us to the same place. Absolutely not. This is just a bogus claim. It's a one deluded way of thinking, utter nonsense, and something that was started and promoted by Mara. So we need to put a stop to that, and at least in our minds, and go back to the original teachings if we're talking about Nibbana, because it does have step-by-step process that we have to go through. It's not a shot in the dark type of a thing, looking outside in the sun for the ring that was lost inside the house. So we need to be very careful when it comes to whatever it is that is being promoted and taught as something spiritual or religious, simply because it makes us feel good, but essentially does not lead us anywhere, especially does not take us out of samsara, the cycle of rebirth. So to want to experience Nibbana requires a more responsible position from us in our quest, which means to maintain a pragmatic attitude, an aptitude even, or a knack at seeing what brings us meaningful happiness. Meaningful happiness. This in itself cuts us free from relying on emotional gratification, looking for the senses. So this quest need not just be a way for us to fulfill yet another emotional need. That's what I'm trying to say. So interestingly enough, when we look at Lord Buddha's contemporaries, the people who would come and visit him, to study with him, to learn, they display themselves as being very responsible, very cautious in what they were looking for in the teachings, how they accepted the teachings of their teachers, not just the ones who were coming to the Buddha, but at that time in India. So often there was a lot more scrutiny, investigation, and consideration involved. Something which I'm sad to say don't find that often in the way people approach today religion, or specifically the Dhamma. So we need to be pointed out. But once we get a better understanding of the Dhamma and what is not Dhamma, then we become able to clearly understand how talking about being kind or compassionate, or being compassionate, or not promoting violence, or simply doing good deeds to others, although great qualities to have in a character, however, they don't lead us out of suffering. So doing just dana or doing good deeds for others, they're great. You're developing a lot of merits, yeah, but they will never get you out of samsara and put you closer to Nibbana. Let's face it. Let's be honest about this. So we need to give the listener, we need to give those people who come asking for teachings clear-cut, definitive instructions, step-by-step instructions, which fortunately the Buddha gave us. And we need to give some, a medicine, a tool that works. Being compassionate, just saying something, an abstraction like that, is not going to help anybody ultimately to get them into Nibbana. They're just going to still maintain their existences, transmigrations in samsara. So otherwise, even at the time of Lord Buddha, before he became the Buddha, he was searching. There were a lot of people who were doing good deeds. There were a lot of people who were compassionate. But nobody was experiencing Nibbana. That's what makes Lord Buddha's path totally different. He showed the way out to people. He discovered the Dhamma. But we need to know, especially as teachers, what it is that we're advocating for people to follow as the Dhamma. Because there's a lot riding on us, even on our karma, especially as teachers. A lot for us to bear eventually if we are misrepresenting the Dhamma. So first we need to be realistic and acknowledge the fact that we're living in not so different of a time than the one that was lived by Lord Buddha and his contemporaries. So we must be objective and laser sharp, which means we need to look for and go straight to the very thing, the teaching that is undeniably, unmistakably valid, as it first left the lips of Lord Buddha, the Tathagata, as we chart out our trajectory as to where our destination is. It's like when you're putting your coordinates to go to somewhere and you're putting it in your GPS, you need to know where you are. It will ask you as you're putting the destination, where are you? Where am I going to start this journey from? And then it will chart it out and it will give you the time and how long it will be and the distance. So it's no different when it comes to us pursuing, is Nibbana possible for me? Because if I'm following a wrong set of instructions or teachings, it is not possible at all. So, as I've mentioned in many talks, doing dana or engaging in rites and rituals like pujas will not take us to Nibbana either. So we need to be aware of that. They're helpful tools to center the mind and to gain some merits, but other than that, they won't take you to Nibbana. So at the most, they will give us a celestial or heavenly birth when we die. But ultimately, we might even stay in those realms, depending on the nature of the merits. Eventually, we're going to drop from those states when our time runs out, when the bank balance runs out. And we will find ourselves in a far worse state than we are in. That's the nature of this whole mechanism called samsara. And if we're lucky, we might be reborn as a human being, if we are lucky. Otherwise, there's a better chance for us to even be reborn in lower states, an animal, hungry ghost, or even worse, in the hells. Well, because last time I was alive as a human being, I was just instructed to keep doing good deeds and do dana. Nothing to do with the mind. No work on virtue, no work on my meditation, no developing of wisdom. That was a wasted opportunity. So that is my position on that. And so if we're talking about attaining Nibbana, we need to reevaluate this whole picture. And because it is the ending of these samsaric life terms or life sentences that Lord Buddha gave us the Dhamma, trusted us with the Dhamma, so that we can break free from all this craziness called samsara. Birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death, again and again, and everything you can imagine, all kinds of pain and suffering that you see and encounter while you're alive during that lifetime. The people we lose, the tears, the oceans of tears that we cry. So we shouldn't be mixing philosophies, and we need to look at the nature of my involvement in the desire to attain Nibbana. And what are the teachings that I'm following? These are crucial parts of how we start on the journey. Now, a solid question to be asked here is this: why do we even need to attain Nibbana? What is the driving force behind us wanting to taste or attain it? Now, this is an important question for people to ask themselves. And here's where we find we need to look at the relationship that we have with this desire, and to check and evaluate its level of intensity, if you will, the fervor of this intensity, of the desire. How badly does the person want to experience Nibbana? And this usually gives us the why. The why. So there was a reason for Lord Buddha to teach the Four Noble Truths. This reason has everything to do with us getting sick and tired, basically, of the repetitive cycle of discernment, the unending cycle, loop of going after and trying to grab happiness from this sensual source of desires, some sense of fulfillment in objects outside of myself, to change the very situations around me. This is suffering. Because we know, even if we grab it, even for a millisecond, we know that in the next millisecond, it's gone. We've attained it. I've finally gotten this thing that I wanted, but nah, I'm dissatisfied. So there's that big hole in my heart still. That's suffering. So the person must deeply know, becoming aware of, and fully understand, and in many ways learn to appreciate by becoming aware of suffering, and thereby get sick of it. This is the first noble truth. Becoming aware of its deep meaning in us, suffering. That's what makes it the noble truth, because the person realizes it to the point that they will look for answers, reasons as to why it is that I'm suffering. And here, if they persevere, then they will see that there is in fact a cause, a desire to change, to do a repeat, to get, to grab, to regain their satisfaction, to remove the undesirable, to bring back something, all this kind of craziness. And how tightly we try to grab hold of that, cling to that, that dictates the level of suffering we're going to experience. And this basically is the second noble truth, samudaya satya, the truth of the origin or cause of suffering. Next, the Buddha offers us the third noble truth, which stems out of the realization of the cause of suffering, which sets the person at ease. Because now you know what's happening. Now you know why the suffering is there, which allows us the room for us to breathe and to know that there is a relief, which comes immediately after the knowing of our contribution to our suffering. And by knowing and understanding how our wanting to change the outside circumstances or the undesirable, where we're running after the sixth sense doors, sixth sense objects, to look for more sense pleasures, will always leave us empty-handed. This is knowing the third noble truth, which basically is the cessation. The moment the person loosens up their grip on wanting, there's relief from that suffering, because I'm no longer going to be holding on to that fire, that flame. I'm not going to burn my hands. That's a good thing, right? So the ending of suffering. Now, having understood these three, intellectually at least, next leads the person to look for a step-by-step process, a guide, a reliable and repetitive method that is applicable and measurable, time after time, whereby the person may stay on track while living the holy life. This, of course, is the fourth noble truth, and that is the Magga, or the path, the Noble Eightfold Path. Step by step, we start with samadhi. And if you were paying attention, even from the beginning, when I said we need to look down and around us and see what teachings are we following, what we're doing is we're establishing ourselves in samadhi, practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. Because if we don't have samadhi, right view from the start, I'm going to be incorporating all kinds of integrated teachings or religious practices and get nowhere, pretty much. So we need to know if we're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path or not. Now, this is where we know that we're standing on solid ground. This makes up the path that leads us to Nibana. So in case you want to know how, here we go. That's it. The four noble truths. When asked before his death by Ananda, his attendant, as to whether there will be arahants, fully awakened people in the future, Lord Buddha responded to him in no uncertain terms. That's a double negative, right? So he was very clear. He said, Ananda, so long as the Noble Eightfold Path is still available in the world, one requirement, so long as the Eightfold Path is still being taught properly in the world, so long as there are individuals genuinely practicing the Noble Eightfold Path being taught to them, the world will never be short of arahants, even in the age of cell phones. He didn't say that, I'm adding that now. So long as, and we're talking about it, the Noble Eightfold Path in the form of the Four Noble Truths. So long as you have that, that's already checking the first one, the second one. Now, are we practicing it? That's the key. So we need to be possessed of the wholesome desire, what's called Dhamma Chanda, the desire, the wholesome desire of Dhamma, which is that of attaining liberation, the release from suffering. Also, I want to mention how some people have the mistaken notion that desire is completely shunned in the Dhamma. That is not the case. It is necessary to have some desire, which is noble disciple, noble desire. I'm sorry, and that is what we call chanda, which is also part of the four iddhipadas, the four bases of psychic or spiritual power. The others being virya, chitta, and vimansa. But just focusing on the desire part. So that is what allows us to complete the three trainings, which I said: virtue, mental cultivation, and wisdom. These are the musts in order for us to experience Nibbana. So in addition to chanda, we also need to have virya, as I mentioned, which is the effort that we need to apply. It's like the fuel that you put in the car to make the car engine run so it can take you there, wherever your destination is. Earlier, I was talking about the GPS destination. So it's the same principle. But we need to go. We need to put the energy to pull ourselves out of complacency, of inertia, of laziness, of drowsiness, of dullness, to kick out the boredom out of our lives. But that is not enough in itself. We also must cultivate the mind. So it's not about the reading of the books or this or that teacher. Quoting the Buddha means nothing ultimately. It needs to go into your DNA. And this is where your meditation practice is paramount. So Nibbana without proper meditation is not possible. Now, within the Noble Eightfold Path, starting, as I said, with the right view, Samma Ditti, we have established ourselves in the right direction. But the great teacher also included right mindfulness and right collectedness of mind, or Samma Sati and Samma Samadhi. So we need to be practicing the right kind of meditation techniques. So here's where we need to find ourselves a good teacher. Someone who teaches us that which is in the suttas, not something that they can come up with, and not something that is out of the commentaries that came much later. And most commentators were scholars or are scholars, and many of them actually are not practitioners, most of them. So we don't want to have so much heady stuff or even metaphysics. The Nibbanic experience has nothing to do with either of these. So we need to go back to the suttas where things are clearly delineated, properly described by Lord Buddha and his Arya Savakas, his noble disciples. And while we're on it, we shouldn't look at the Dhamma as something complicated. People have a tendency of looking at things, if it's complicated, then it must be true. No, it's not. That's why you had so many illiterate people becoming Sotapannas, Sakadagamis, Anagamis, even Arahants. Because it wasn't complicated. Now, before my time's up, I want to just mention about meditations, because I, just briefly mentioned it, but it's so important. We can't have Nibbana without meditation, because that's what's going to lead us into wisdom. What kind of meditations did the Lord Buddha talk about? Well, we have the most basic is the breath meditation. Another one that I like to teach often is metta, or loving kindness. To experience the Brahma Viharas, or the boundless states, which can take us, both of these meditations can take us into the jhanas, by the way. The jhanic states of higher levels of understanding and depth of going deeper and deeper into deeper states of mind and calm, where upekkha becomes possibility, where you have a deeper understanding of reality. We also have the 32 parts of the body contemplation, and the contemplation of the inevitability of death, and looking at death, and many other practices called kamatanas. So, of course, all of these are looked at while using the formula of satipatthana, the foundations, the anchor points of mindfulness, which enables us to take the practice into our day-to-day life, personal lives, as we bring mindfulness using the object of meditation given by our teacher into the body. And as it moves through the different states, we bring mindfulness into the character of our feelings, be they pleasant, painful, or neutral. So we bring the mindfulness, the state of mindfulness inward. And that way we can also start seeing the quality of the mind, which is chittanupassana. The first word, kayanupassana. Second was vedananupassana, the feeling. Now we're talking about chittanupassana, the quality of the mind, whether it is calm, whether it's agitated, whether it's tranquil, drowsy. We need to know what is happening in the mind, what we're working with. And that necessitates the presence of wisdom. But the wisdom cannot happen without proper sati, which is mindfulness. Remember, samma sati, samma samadhi. They bring us to panya, which is the third of the three trainings, sila, samadhi, panya. Remember, I mentioned first? So we start seeing how mindfulness then starts to reveal things for us. So it's an unraveling, unlayering process, removing the veils of expectations, our expectations, perceptions, and delusions. And we finally start seeing things the way they are. Yatha bhutan pajanati, Lord Buddha says. The person starts seeing things the way they are, truly. And that already means that the person is really close. So remember that whatever we think about, what we perceive or proliferate in our thoughts, whatever we keep pondering, that becomes our reality. Okay? That becomes our reality. So if we are enjoying living in confusion, if we're basking under the burning hot coals of sensual pleasures and lusts, if we're enjoying whatever we've taken for life to enjoy by ourselves, if we're basically living comfortably with lobha, dosa, moha, the kileshas, greed, hatred, and delusion, then whatever we create, do, or produce, whether cell phones or AI, even seeking Nibana, it will still be tinged, mired, dirtied, sullied by the same foul-smelling dirt. Absolutely unwholesome. But with the help of the Dhamma, as evidenced by living according to sila, virtue, samadhi, and panya, then absolutely we can incorporate both our spiritual practice with technology. So they don't have to be against each other. That's what I'm trying to say. And that way we can raise the consciousness of our species and of the entire planet and bring it out of this dark age of constant wars, diseases, fueled by greed, lust, hatred, and delusion, the poisons that stop us from attaining and tasting the freedom that is Nibana. So what I'm finally trying to say here is this: We are responsible for our own lives and what we make as our priority. So, is Nibbana possible? Well, I will answer that by this other question. Is that my priority? That says a lot. Because the path to Nibbana is here. It is wide open, in fact, so long as we're alive and we're still breathing. Because we still have the Dhamma today. We still have the Dhamma today. And so long as you have a functioning brain, basically you're able to process information, you're able to practice, you're able to probe, you're able to experience mindfulness and practice it, you're able to meditate and understand, to restrain yourself from being a slave to your passions, then it most certainly can and will happen to you, so long as you are doing what is there delineated by Lord Buddha and you're following the instructions of a teacher without adding your own stuff to it. So we have the indispensable need for virtue that can allow us to do that. So we need to push ourselves out of fear, out of complacency. I've discovered this in my patients when I work as a psychotherapist, where you show a person the interventions, the tools, but the brain will want to go back to what felt comfortable. Okay, no one can force you to do that. Not every person who came to Lord Buddha became an arahant. And he was the source of Dhamma. He was the Dhamma. But the person has to shake things up for themselves to improve their situation. And that no one can do for you. You must decide to do that. And we have this thing called hiri and uttappa, wise moral shame and wise moral consideration. Those are the backbones of sila, practicing virtue. That's a quick way to start. Okay? We can't overshoot. We can't avoid working on our virtue. If I get drunk, if I drink alcohol, if I do drugs and want to meditate, that's not going to work. Because you're breaking your own back, plain and simple. If I'm doing psychedelics and I'm studying the Dhamma, it won't work. It has nothing to do with each other. You have to pick one or the other. Which one leaves you in samsara? Which one leaves you in suffering? Stop doing that. And stop telling yourself lies. And listening to teachers who don't even deserve the title. Lord Buddha never advocated for people to take psychedelics, to indulge in intoxicants. So what are you creating? Go back to the source, to the teachings. That's why I keep saying that. So if Dhamma is lacking in our lives, then we're suffering. If we're suffering, it means that there's no Dhamma in our lives. So we make the choice. There was a term that Lord Buddha said, in Pali, it's beautiful. Jayatha mupamadata mupaccha vipatisarino ahuvatha. Meditate. Meditate to reach the serene collectedness of mind. Do not be negligent. Otherwise, you will only end up full of regrets. That has impelled me, that has propelled me throughout these years to practice and to learn and to probe and to understand. And that is what I pass on to you also, the listeners, the viewers, to see if we can bring that into our intentionality behind wanting to attain Ibana. And I know I touched upon many things, but I would like to pause here and open up for any questions. Hopefully there are some, and I'm going to do my best to answer. So, question number 1. Bhante, can a layperson attain Nibana, or Nibana can be attained by monastics only? Absolutely. A layperson can attain Nibana. And by Nibana, what I mean by that state of release, liberation, first we need to talk about the 4 stages of Nibbana. 4 stages. they're called of awakening. And they are also broken up into two individually. We don't have to go into technicalities. But basically, Sotapanna, which is a person who has attained stream entry, this is where the person has the Dhamma eye, Dhamma Chakku, it's called. The person has now such a strong faith, such a conviction, such a strong trust, and that didn't exist half a minute ago, but now it does. It is life transforming. There's a metamorphosis that happens. And you don't have to be a monastic for that, but you can taste the Nibbana. And the second stage is Sakadagami, which is a once returner. That means at the most the person has to come back once. By the way, the first one, the person, the stream winner or stream enterer, cannot break precepts, by the way. Even if they want to, they expose themselves if they did. But they have at the most 7 more lives to go. At the most, if they're very, very lazy. So Sakadagami once returner, and then we have Anagamis, non-returners. They are reborn in the pure abodes unless they become arahants in this life or in the transition or at landing. So none of these have to be monastics. And even a layperson can become an arahant, but they have only about a week or 2 to wear robes because there's no other option for them. It's impossible for them to remain arahant and a layperson because the heart's longing is leaning so much, is driven by dispassion and disenchantment with life and what senses have to offer. So the only refuge they have are in the robes because they are living Sangha. They are the living Dhamma. But the biggest group of awakened ones, even at the time of the Buddha, were lay people. Not many people talk about this. So many of the Lord Buddha's supporters were already awakened. They had experienced some level of Nibbana. Not full of awakening like an arahant, but not venerable, but Anathapindika, Visakha, Chitta the householder, Hattaka of Alavi, General Siha, countless names. All of these people were lay people who had tasted a level of awakening. Their heart were settled in the Dhamma. So absolutely, you don't have to be a monastic. So I hope that answers your question. Bhante, if Nibbana is not a place or a form, what is it? Lord Buddha used this interesting mechanism to help because we like to rationalize things, right? So what he devised was a way of saying what Nibbana is not. Is not. It is not a place. There's lovely references to it as far as what it is not. It says where the suttas say where no sun, where no moon exists, where no day, where no night exists, etc., etc. So many beautiful expressions. However, it is experienced by the experiencer. One thing for sure, though, the person has completely removed the poisoned arrow of ignorance. That means the person will never suffer from psychological or emotional suffering, stress. That's not going to happen. They can still feel pain in their body. That's the other arrow that we're shot with when we're born. That's unavoidable. Even Lord Buddha had to deal with that. So, and if you see someone who can explain to you or describe to you what Nibbana is, it's this, it's this, it's this, it's this, they don't know what they're talking about. That's definitely not Nibbana. So watch out for someone who explains it like that or promises you to give you Nibbana. That's another no. It's a red flag. So we stay away from that. The person has to see it, just like the term I said to you earlier, yata bhutang pajanati. I cannot show you that. The teacher cannot give you that. Lord Buddha could not even give you that. When you bite into a mango, you will know the flavor of the mango. You don't need any convincing. And you can't describe it either fully. to anyone. You're the experiencer. But that we're talking about something so mundane and banal as eating a mango, despite the fact that it's so delicious, organic. Nibana is even more, because there's this incredible state of relief that is associated with it. Another word for Nibbana is Nirodha. Nirodha means cessation, the third noble truth. Nirodha, one of the definitions that I've come across is no more prison. You're no longer in a prison state. So the person will feel that sense of liberation for oneself. They cannot describe it. So I invite you to practice Sila Samadhi Panya. So you know it for yourself, and you can embody that in your behavior, in your character, and the world around you will change because you've changed. So I will leave it at that. Next question. Bhante, how could we relate the teachings in Buddhism in the era of AI cell phones to the younger generations, knowing that many of them are attracted more towards enjoyment in AI social media? Very good question, because unfortunately, we use these terms, social media. Well, there's nothing social about it, is there? The person is sitting in the bathroom playing with their phone. I've seen kids, 7-year-old kids, sitting there next to each other, siblings, each one with their iPad, not knowing what to say to each other. People in San Francisco, in California, in the United States of America, a few years ago, I read an article where parents in the Silicon Valley area, highly educated, mom and dad, this and that, but they are hiring individuals who will play ball with their children because they don't know how to play. The parents don't know how to throw a ball to the child, for the child to capture and then to throw back at them so that they can have fun on the grass. Look how sad of a situation we're living in. So when there is a lack of intelligence, in that sense, wisdom, there is a demise. Now, this is where the parents have to take a more directive role, meaning putting limits on how much cell phone usage is there. That is really crucial, because many parents have become very laxed, loose. Oh, I'm very modern. Oh, I'm very educated. I'm very considerate. Well, no. Even when you're planting a seed, you need to put a very strong, sturdy metal or something sturdy next to it as the stem is coming out, as it's growing as a budding plant. And what do you do next? You tie that plant against this piece of bamboo or this metal rod. Why? Because if you had left that plant the way it is, it's going to be all over the place, and it's not going to be the best that it can be. So are the children. So we have to start at any point. So even in therapy, I've asked patients to put because I would see even teenagers as my patients, I would encourage them to put their phone on silent or just turn it off and put it in the drawer. Even in sessions, I've done this. It was like, if you're going to expect me to work with you and help you, give you tools so you can control your anger, I need you to put your phone that's in your hand, that you're checking all the time, because that's disrespectful to me and what we're doing here. I need you to turn it off and come over here and put it in my drawer face down and close the door. I wouldn't do it, but I would encourage them to do it. And it's fun to see these teenagers do that, because they also don't know the meaning of control, healthy control. They lost control because the parents are not modeling them properly. The kids don't have proper role models. They look at movie stars, they look at singers, they look at, sports athletes as their role models, or politicians, even worse. All of these people have a lot of kileshas. So we need to be very careful not to be afraid with our children in setting boundaries. Now, if I'm saying that and I'm doing the opposite, and my child or somebody that I'm disciplining is seeing that, I'm being a hypocrite. So guess who I have to work on first? So that has to be first also, so that the child can actually be supported by, hey, look at my dad, look at my mom. They're doing what they want me to do. They're modeling it for me. So you can model for your child what it is that you're hoping to get. Another thing, there's no media, no TV, no social media, no phone anywhere on the dinner table. And make sure you have dinners or lunches or breakfast together without the phones. Put the phones, get a glass jar, have them turn the phones off, put them in the jar, put them away. It's these simple, small steps that can really take you far. So I would start with that. Any other questions? When we play bowling, we know our score as we progress, as we can see how many pins we put down. However, how do we know how we progress as we walk the path towards Nibbana? How do we know we have attained Sotapanna, Anagami, etc.? It's very clearly, by the way, I love the question. It's very clearly pointed out in the suttas, and that's where we have certain criteria that have to be met. And I like your reference to the pinballs and all that, and the bowling. We have similar. Like I mentioned earlier, in the case of a sotapanna, they can never break precepts. For example, they were able to lie 5 minutes ago. Now they can't. And they don't know why they can't, but they just feel this inner urge not to. That's one example. And even if they do, it happens by mistake, and they can never conceal it if they're a true sotapanna. But three things in particular. We have 10 fetters. They're called sangyojanas. Most people, all people have this, as long as we are not arahants. So for the sage of sotapanna, there are 3 fetters that need to be dropped. Okay? So the personality view drops. This is me. This is who I am. I need to worship me. I worship myself. And, thinking that you are a separate entity, a personality, that is so solid. That sense of solidity comes apart when the person becomes a sotapanna. They really have a hard time negotiating that anymore. And this happens very quickly when the person hits upon or enters the stream. Another one is the person no longer has any belief in rites and rituals. Sila bata paramasa, as a way to awakening. They know this for sure. They will also recognize what is Dhamma from what is Adhamma. The person might be such a well-respected, even a monk, but if the monk is talking what is Adhamma, because that does happen today, especially, as I was mentioning earlier, the person who is in Sotapanna and the other person who's not, this Sotapanna will know for sure this is not Adhamma, this is not Dhamma, they will say. And they will know it in their hearts. So that's another criterion. Another one is the doubt is completely removed towards the teacher, Lord Buddha, the teaching, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the noble Sangha, the Mahasangha, which is actually the collection of all the noble disciples. That's what we call the Mahasangha. Those people who have seen with the Dhamma Chakku. So, of course, as a Sakadagami, the other 2 fetters get to be shaken, meaning hatred or anger and craving for sensual lust and things. Those 2 start to really shake. It's like the tooth I described. The tooth that hasn't come out yet, but it's shaking, those 2 will start moving like that. And then in this case of an anagami, those 2 fall off. And that's how you know, for example, the anagami will never be interested in having any sexual intercourse. They will shun it. They will push it away. And they don't have that hatred that they used to have. It's gone. they can be upset about something sometimes, but they don't have the ability to hold on to that grudge. The hatred is gone. So these are the five fetters and sangyojanas that are dropped in the first three. And there's the other five sangyojanas, the upper sangyojanas or fetters, one of them being conceit, restlessness, etc., ignorance, and seeking to be becoming, etc. And so basically, when those, for in the case of the Arahant, those five also drop. So as you see, Lord Buddha very clearly pointed out for us what to look for. So if you see an Arahant who's a layperson, guess what? Who's been like that for more than 2 weeks or something, who's not wearing robes, or who's enjoying this, running around and enjoying sensual lusts, guess what? You're not dealing with an Arahant. You're dealing with a Putujjana. In fact, none of the stages. He's not even a Sotapanna, or she. So we have very clear markers. Questions?
Hi, Bhante.
Yes.
I think we have really good response tonight. We have another more 7 questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm okay to answer if we have time. Bhante, what is this Dhammic wisdom are we talking about here then? Dhammic wisdom. Dhamma is not found in suttas. We need to understand that. The suttas, the teachings, even this Dhamma Desana, these are just pointing fingers towards something, the teaching. So if you've been listening to me, you will know that that Dhammic wisdom comes embodied within you. It takes shape in you. How? Because most of these intellectual type questions don't feed your gut. They don't feed your stomach. They don't do anything for you. It's just mental jargon. So we need to be very careful what we are asking and why. Is it intellectual more hoarding of ideas so that I can feel like I have something to talk about in a party? Or am I really seeking answers? So the Dhammic wisdom comes when you are applying Sila Samadhi Panya. For yourself, that will be absolutely 100% undeniably real. Then you don't need me to come and teach you anything or to tell you, because you will know what is Dhamma, what is not. So we need to stay away from just argumentativeness or contentious or attitudes or in looking. So there needs to be that sense of humility in us. It's very important. I've met many professors, many of my professors sometimes had PhDs, more than one, some of them, in Buddhism. And I would ask sometimes some of these teachers, have you practiced? And they say no, but they will be so clear about which commentator, which scholar, in what century, in what part of the Southeast Asia said what about what statement in the suttas. So a lot of about. I like to call this regurgitating someone else's vomit. If you notice, I'm not the typical, when I give Dhamma talks, I'm very real in the way I describe things, because I look at things in a more visceral way, and I'm not shying away from shocking people, as you can tell. And that I get from Lord Buddha as my teacher, as my example. So we need to, I would be shocked, of course, when I would hear a professor who's such a wealth of, I would consider them as a library of Dhamma, but they have never practiced. They can list out all the Eightfold Path, but they wouldn't ever know what it is. Right view from wrong view. It's like somebody who goes and takes a prescription of a medication that can heal them from their terminal illness, and they will, I said this example the other day, I like to use this because it's very poignant. They go copy it, print it at a printer shop and magnify it, and they laminate it, and they carry it over their head like a billboard and say, I have the cure to my sickness. I have the cure to my sickness. But are they cured? So this is a practice-based path. So the Dhamma, wisdom, is something that has to take place rooted in your life, head to toe, starting with your sila. If your virtue is lacking, you need to fix that. That's where the Dhamma is. If you're not meditating, you need to fix that, because that's where your Dhamma is. And you will stop making the same crazy mistakes that we make, constantly going into this maladaptive behaviors, in becoming reactionary beings, putujanas, lost in the three defilements, poisons. And you will be able to make choices with a lot more precision and care based on virtue. And that is your Dhamma, because that's coming from your heart source. Wisdom is there. That's where your Dhamma is. And by the way, that's also where your defilements are, in your heart, not in someone else's heart. No matter how bad a person is, no matter how wrong a teacher is, let's say, they will never take you to hell. It is your actions, how you live your life, that will. And similarly, it is your actions, your intentions, and what you put behind your actions that will take you to Nibbana, to the experience of it. Where? Not somewhere out there. You will experience it. So I hope that helps. Next question. Just now when Bhante mentioned that oneself always like to go back to the state where one is comfortable, it does remind me of my own self and my hubby. We both always have difficulty to change, even knowing we have to change for better. Is there any way we could do to adopt the change? Yeah. Look at your partner, your hubby, your husband, and look at them and say, just do this experiment. You can do this. They don't have to agree with it, but try it. I used to, now I don't do couples therapy as a bhikkhu. I don't, it's not, I can make suggestions to people, but I can't see them as a therapist, as a couple, especially therapist. But one method that really works, and you also see this permeating within it, some Dhammic elements, is when you think of your husband or partner and say, I want to live my life today in a way where I want to give my partner what they would like from me. I want to live it for them when you're interacting with them. So you make their needs your priority. That is very jolting, because the other person is not thinking that's the case. Because everybody's in it for themselves these days. So we don't know how to connect. We don't know how to relate with one another. We've become selfish, essentially. There was an incident where Lord Buddha ended up going to, in Kosambi, but Lord Buddha went to visit some of his other students, three of them, Venerable Anuruddha, Kimbala, and Nandiya. They were living together. And Lord Buddha went and asked them, how do you live, bhikkhus, together? And they said, well, I put my needs behind my fellow bhikkhus' needs, meaning I think of their needs first. Like, what would they like? If they like me to rearrange the seat in this way, if they like me to put this here because they lived in close quarters, then I would do it. I would think of the other person's needs first. And guess what? This is one person. You have two other people. The other two people were doing the same thing. And there's a beautiful image. They say, they're blending like milk and water. Blending like milk and water. So can you live like that? I think we can. I think we can. So try that. Next question. I have a hard time comprehending non-self. I have read and heard many explanations, but still cannot really understand it. Every time I think it If there is no identity, then how we identify the Buddha and the Arhats? See, this is a metaphysical thing that people had come up with, and sometimes we have been taught that you need to understand really non-self in order for you to experience Nibbana per se, and that's not the case. Even Lord Buddha would use when he would, for conventional usage, he never said there is no self. It's the solidity, a solid idea of an identity, that I am this, and it is unshakable, that it is immovable, that it is solid. That's the problem. That's the problem. Because you would hear Lord Buddha say like, bring me this, or when I was here. So there are these references to a self, isn't there? So we need to understand the role. There's semantics, there's conventional usage of the word self. Otherwise, we won't be able to. It becomes too much of a philosophical arena of nonsense. The Lord Buddha was pragmatic teacher. His teaching is very pragmatic as we see it. So I encourage you to put the metaphysics hat off, to remove it and put it aside, and come back to the basics. You don't need to understand these non-self ideas, because over centuries, remember the corruptions that happened in the Dhamma? Many of them occurred because of the introduction of metaphysics. And later on, we had the Abhidhamma, where people said, well, if you don't understand the Abhidhamma, then you can never become awakened, which is complete nonsense. First of all, Lord Buddha didn't teach the Abhidhamma. It came 300 years later. So many of these things we forget to consider. So come back to the most basics. Sila, Samadhi, Panya, just these three. I got to hold my hand closer to the camera because it's going out of screen. Applying that in your life is already a lot. And you will know for yourself what is Dhammic wisdom, what is Dhamma. You don't need to worry about these nonsense philosophies and metaphysics, because the Buddha never wanted to engage with any philosophers. There were, in fact, 10 questions that he didn't want to answer because they were absolutely useless, because they don't remove the person from suffering. The Buddha taught two things, remember. He taught suffering and he taught the way out of suffering. That the teaching of going out of suffering is all practical based. It's pragmatic. It's application based. That is what we're doing. So please don't worry about metaphysical stuff. And you can use the word I, myself. So just to clarify, I hope that was helpful. Next question. Can chanting help us to attain Nibbana? No. No. Unfortunately, it teaches us laziness. And it's easier. Yeah, even if you're going to sit and chant for 2 days or 1 week, it's one of the most useless ways of making use of this body, of this birth, of the human birth, and especially of the fact that we are closer to the Dhamma. So I'm very staunchly against focusing on chanting. Chanting is good a little bit here and there. I chant in the morning, or like I did in the beginning of this desana. It helps to focus the mind. That's good. But we should not push it too far. It was mostly started by non-meditators, lazy monks. And it's easy because a lot of funds come in through that. You go and you see what's happening. But when a group of people are sitting and meditating, you can't see what's going on, right? So the lazy mind wants to see things, action. And then you feel tired also, and you feel good. Yeah, I did something. But has the person changed because of the chanting? No. Has the defilements, have they dropped? No. Same with dana. So the intention, Lord Buddha taught dana. He taught about the existence of the devas. He taught about virtue. Aha, that's very personal. So it doesn't make the practice personal. Sila, samadhi, panya. He didn't say puja, chanting, rites and rituals. In fact, if you noticed earlier, I was answering one of the questions. When a person becomes a sotapanna, sila bata paramasa drops automatically. Rites and rituals, where chanting is, it drops. You know for sure that there's no way that it can help you to attain Nibbana. No way. So I hope that helps. Next question. How do we progress from the first jhana to the second, third, and fourth jhana? Can very advanced meditators achieve all four jhanas in one sitting if they want to? Absolutely. I've had students who've attained the fourth jhana without having done any meditation previously, Buddhist meditation. But once they followed the instructions, they were able to, and that's not because of me, that's because of their merits, their punya, and the fact that they came to the Dhamma, and the fact that they really put the effort and were following good, strict, virtuous lifestyle by following the 5 precepts. Those have to be there. So you cannot separate samadhi or the meditation part from sila, virtue. But the jhanas themselves don't necessarily bring us to wisdom. However, they can help the mind to calm down, to reach a level of what we call equanimity or upekkha, which really blossoms in the fourth jhana. So as far as how, there are many teachers who teach it, but of course the greatest teacher is Lord Buddha, and he clearly describes it in all of the suttas, especially in the Anguttara Nikaya. And you can experience them through, while following a guidance of a teacher. I highly recommend you doing that. Sorry, I got to catch my thoughts. Oh, I need to drink some water. I forgot. So please think of your virtue really being a crucial part of the progress, because we're not doing this as an ego trip. I notice sometimes people do that, and the person can be very defiled when they come out of the jhana, even the 8th jhana, by the way. I've seen people who are just very conceited, unfortunately, some people, because they can go through all those 8 jhanas. Now, coming back to in one sitting part, absolutely. You can go, and it can be very quickly, but it has to be determined by the meditator how long they want to stay in each of the jhanas. Sometimes the meditator gets to be so proficient that they say, well, I want to go straight into the 4th jhana. Well, you will, but it's going to be very quick. It might make the person feel like they just dropped into the 4th jhana, but actually they did do a stop. It's like going up the ladders, the steps, but it was so quick, and now they rest on the 4th jhana, and it can be done. And you don't necessarily have to be just sitting while you're in a jhana. So it's not a trance-like state, because wisdom is supposed to be growing within the mind of the person. You don't see that when the commentators started their own thing of describing. Remember, commentators rarely practice meditation, so they didn't know what they were talking about. Like Venerable Sariputta, he would know what he's talking about, because wisdom must be there. That distinguishes Lord Buddha's teaching from the other jhanic practices that were there when he was just Siddhartha Gautama, searching. He was even able to get to the 7th and 8th jhanas before becoming Lord Buddha, and he saw that that was not the path, because he still had within him the kileshas. He couldn't remove them because there was no panya, no wisdom. So, but I don't want to deviate or go on a tangent, but I think I answered your question. So when someone attained Nibbana, does their consciousness still around? Uh, yeah, they function. Excuse me. They go and do things, especially in the case of the lay people who attain the first, second, and third stages of Nibbana. The mother is still a mother, the teacher is still a teacher, the taxi driver is still the taxi driver, the bus driver the same, the pilot. You're still doing your thing, but you're doing it in a different, with a different flair, if we can call it that. There's a sense of ease about them. If the person, let's say, prior to them experiencing it, if they were difficult people, even to be around, suddenly you want to spend time next to them, even if you don't say anything. You just want to be in the same room with them. There's a sense of, ah. And the person's footprints, metaphorically speaking, are not so heavy. And even if they, let's say, get mad in any of these 3 stages, they get upset about something in 1 minute, suddenly they won't be holding on to that anger, that grudge. It won't turn into a grudge. So you will make your breakfast, you will make for other people breakfast, you will go to work, you will do your thing, but you're not holding so tightly, gripping things. So there is a qualitative difference in the stream of life that you're living through, in your presence. So you are doing your things, your responsibilities. Nothing happened there. And let's say if somebody, one time when I was teaching in Indonesia, one person said, well, I have, my business involves making beer, alcoholic beverages. Will that be a problem? And I said, yes. Yes. But you have to make that decision. So, because you are promoting intoxicants. So the person then, if I'm selling guns, if I work with making poisons or weapons and sell them to people, but I went to on a retreat or practiced, and all of a sudden the person is a sotapanna or something higher, the person will give up that job because they will know deep in their heart that there's something wrong. There's something non-virtuous about this. And they can't continue. They can't maintain that because it goes against the Dhamma. In those circumstances, yes, they will have to adjust and make the change rather. Because it doesn't, the outside life of the person needs to reflect their inside. And vice versa. So there's this beautiful harmony that takes place. The person's life is becoming more and more Dhamma as the person becomes a Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Nanagami, etc. So I hope that answers your question. Next. Where would our mind and consciousness be when we achieve Nibbana? What is the difference between mind and consciousness? Kindly share. Again, these take us to metaphysics. Unfortunately, sometimes we've read, unfortunately I say, we've read a lot about metaphysical stuff, and a lot of writers out there, both lay and monastic. Sometimes we throw a lot of terms out there. Fortunately, I don't see that as much as I used to 30 years ago or 40 years ago, but it's still there. So a lot of people get into the Dhamma or become interested in the Dhamma by reading books on, like I was saying, about anatta or non-self and things like that. Or we come bearing different teachings from different traditions. Like in some Dhamma talks, I've had people ask me questions from, I don't know, Ram Dass or some other character like Alan Watts or somebody like that, or Vedic, or even Mahayana or Vajrayana, expecting there to be an answer to that. Well, we need to ask, what am I asking? So in Mahayana, for example, there's the Alaya Vijnana and other things, Vijnanavada and all these different traditions that came in, philosophical schools of. So sometimes some of us have read those consciousness. So I won't be able to answer that kind of question because they don't help you to be removed from suffering, or to at least remove suffering from your life. I try to answer questions that are specifically and directly related with your quality of life now, which doesn't have much to do with the intellect. You having or gathering, hoarding new ideas and keeping them like that on the shelf, basically not applying anything. So the Dhamma is applicable. Remember that. It's not philosophical. The Dhamma is not like philosophy. You need to do work, starting with sila, your virtue. But just to kind of give you a reasonable answer, I'd say, from my tradition, from the tradition of Lord Buddha, I would invite you to look at the Panchakhandas, okay? The 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates: Namarupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. What we have later developing are just some commentators and people who picked out these things and wanted to do their own theses or dissertations on them. And they started their own schools because everybody wants to be lazy. Either they want to go chant or sit there and argue, come up with ideas, basically not practice, basically being lazy. That's what a philosopher is. It's a useless career, in my opinion. But that's not the Dhamma. But if you're curious about knowing what is mind, what is consciousness, which is a very fair curiosity, I think, then we need to go back to what Lord Buddha said about them, not some other people centuries down the road from when the Buddha taught. So approaching the 5 aggregates and understanding their role. And when you look at that, you will start to see that each of these plays their own roles. They have their own characteristics. And the human being is comprised of these 5. Nama Rupa, there's Rupa and Nama. Rupa means there's the 4 great elements within it, roughly speaking: solidity, fluidity, heat, and wind. These are characteristics. The 32 parts of the body are all comprising these 4 elements. And there's the Nama, if you remember. Nama is the mental aspect of it, mentality aspect of it, which happens to have perception and attention, intention, volition, etc., contact. Then you go to the Vedana part. Vedana has everything to do with making you feel alive, right? But the Buddha described them having 3 characteristics: pleasant, enjoyable basically, painful, and neutral. Okay? Then you go to Sanya. Sanya are your notions, your memories, your thoughts, your mental narratives, etc. Next, we get to Sankharas. Sankharas are those generative causes, or activating energies that we carry because of our habits. Not just in this life, by the way, from many, many lifetimes, which manifest. And they take shape in our behavior and in our ways of responding. You can add that as a nuance to what we call as personality. And then there's the Vijnana. Vijnana is your sense awareness, basically. Sense awareness. How many senses? We have 6. 6 senses in the Dhamma. The 5 normal senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, taste, smell, body, etc., and to feel. And then we have also the mind. To be able to interpret all this data coming in, that makes it have each of them be called like eye consciousness, nose consciousness, etc., mind consciousness. So you put these 5 together, then you have what we call a person. So there is no person, but we use it as a conventionality. I'm also trying to answer the earlier questioner's question. So I hope that helps. Uh, yeah. Yes, we can. Can we? May I know what is the difference between anatta and nihilism and annihilation? Thank you, Bhante. See, again, one of these questions. I see a lot of you are interested in metaphysical questions, which have nothing to do with your practice. Nothing to do with the practice. Who cares about anatta? But if you're really insistent of knowing, okay, even quantum physics tells us that there's nothing. Nothing. This mug, this cup, the water inside of it, these are terms. Call those terms atta or self or soul, whatever you want to call it. But they're just a combination of millions and millions of molecules working together, electrons going almost at the speed of light, functioning, revolving, and the molecules are arranged just in a certain way, but they last for less than a millisecond. They're always changing. That's why when you get a crisp white piece of paper from your printer and you put it outside and you come back to it a few months later and you look at it and it's a little bit yellow. Why is that? Because of anicca. So anything that is susceptible to anicca, follows the rules of anicca, is what? Not atta, anatta. It is conditioned. So approach it like that. And as far as nihilism, this and that, they're part of the micchaditi or wrong views. And we have in the Brahmajala Sutta and the Digha Nikaya, and we have Lord Buddha pointing out over 60 different wrong views. So nihilism is part of that. And today's modern ways of thinking, like atheism or things like that, or even misguided notions like secular Buddhism that want to incorporate that and bring that into the Dhamma, which is causing, which is a very bad karma for them actually, is not doing anything good. So we need to leave such topics aside, because one of the questions was that a lot of people were coming to Lord Buddha with questions on nihilism. These aren't new ideas, by the way. They were there 2,600 years ago in India. But the Lord Buddha would just push them aside and say, how is that getting rid of your suffering, buddy? It doesn't. It doesn't. So you need to go and apply the teachings of the Dhamma. That's the only way you're going to get out of suffering. Even if somebody were to give you an answer that you find to be, yes, this is it, it's still going to keep you in misery, in kileshas, because we are top heavy, thinking so much about our intellect and what more rubbish we're putting in there. So we need to not be so lazy anymore. Philosophy is lazy work. So are you a practitioner? You want to be a practitioner, which that way you're going to go to Nibbana, experience Nibbana. Philosophy is not going to take you there. So if you want to be lazily following philosophical things, arguments, this and that, good luck. But that's going to be another life that you're going to be wasting, plain and simple. You need to do the work. There's no ways, ifs and buts about it. No dana you can give, no chanting you can get yourself out of, no arguing like at a coffee shop sitting there, yeah, talking about this, like I used to do years ago, back in the day. But at the end, you come home miserable, still in dukkha. So enough of that nonsense. Take control of your life. So, any other question? I think there might be one more.
Yes, there will be one more question. So because we have come to 1 hours and 45 minutes now, so we'll just go for one last question. And for the rest of you, if you still have questions, you may email it to Bhante. We will leave the Bhante's email address at the comment box. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, a long one. With great respect, there are different views. According to Dr. Gamini Abhaya, in about 500 years, we have already entered the path to Nibbana or even achieved Nibbana. Nibbana can and must be achieved here and now. This type of rebirth explained here is a Hindu Jain concept of repeated births here on earth, in heavens and hells, which don't exist in reality. Is this a question or are you making a statement? Because it sounds like you're making a statement, and that's not a question. And no, there is no such thing that everybody is in the path, is already achieved. I think that is a nonsensical idea. It's coming from wrong view. This is an absolute example of michaditti. This doesn't, portion of it at least. I am not able to read the rest of it because it's ellipses. This is a promulgation or an advancement of a wrong view, which is not Dhamma. So we need to, this person that you're mentioning, or whoever it is, I haven't heard of, and especially the view that they're presenting goes against the teachings of the Dhamma, just from what I've read. I couldn't see the rest of it. So, and that was not a question. We have to always consider, what will be the nature of my mind at the moment of my death? How about making it even easier? How is it right now? Chances are your state of mind right now will also be reflected on the moment of your death. Pragmatic, isn't it? That is dukkha. Dukkha, there's nothing psychological, philosophical about it. The person is either suffering or not. I jokingly say the person is either pregnant or not. You cannot be a little bit pregnant. You're either in it or you're not. So a view is either right or wrong. So to think deludedly that we are already in Nibana, wasted human life, I would say, because that goes contrary to the Dhamma. You know, there are the great references sutta, and there's a slew of other suttas where Lord Buddha always encourages us. He says, there will come a time where people will stand up and say, oh, I heard this even from the lips of the Tathagata. Or I have heard this from a senior monk or senior monks. I have heard this from people who were with Lord Buddha, etc., etc. And he says, you should not deny it nor accept it. You must first go and check it with the suttas. Next, you need to also check it with the Vinaya, suttantas. You have to have the suttantas, and you have to have the Vibhangas and all that. So Sutta Vibhangas and the Vinaya. So you have two huge resources to back it up. If it is true, it will show itself to be true. That statement has nothing to do with the Dhamma, because there's not even a single place in any of the suttas that I've come across that can validate that. So this was happening not 2,600 years after the Buddha only. This was even happening at the time of the Buddha. You had so many people like Sati, son of a fisherman. You had Malunkyaputta, you had Upananda, you had all these different so-called bhikkhus who were misrepresenting the Buddha. And they were saying to public people, going and giving desanas and saying, I heard this from Lord Buddha. Now, unfortunately, we don't have Lord Buddha with us, who can call us, come here, bhikkhu. Were you saying these things and saying that I said this? And they would say, yes. When did you hear me say these things? This person who says that we're already enlightened, that kind of nonsense. Then why do we need the Four Noble Truths if we're enlightened? Very simple. Does the person have greed, hatred, delusion in them? Do you have hatred? Do you have lust? Well, there goes that theory. If you have lust in your heart, then it's impossible for you to be experiencing Nibbana. If you have hatred, greed, anger, because they cannot coexist. So sometimes we have to use logic. Remember that? Reason. Instead of believing blindly something that just fits our agenda and keeps us lazy, enjoying life and sensual pleasures, and saying, yeah, just like those people who say, I'm doing psychedelic drugs, I'm doing mushrooms, I'm doing marijuana, and I'm also practicing meditation. And I'm also drinking alcohol with my friends. And I'm also using foul language. Wow. Where does the Dhamma come in? So, and how is that reflected in your behavior? So, we need to get rid of these wrong views. There's plenty of them, plenty of them. And that's why we need to go back to the source, to the suttas. And sila, samadhi, panya. That's the perfect litmus test to demonstrate for ourselves, at least, that we are practicing or not the Dhamma. Those three have to be there in order for Nibbana to take place. There's no shortcut outside of that. In my book, that's actually plenty of a shortcut. Really takes us to what Lord Buddha taught and his Arya Savakas experienced. Nibbana. And in case you were wondering, there are plenty of people walking on this planet right now who have experienced those four stages, or at least are on one. So I will stop here unless there's another question that comes up.
All right. Thank you, Bante, for answering all the questions. And
Mhm.
now we would like to invite Bante to commence the Anumodana.
Mhm. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahittika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Lokasasanam. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahittika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahittika Punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Ettavata cham hehi sambadang punya sampadang. Sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Ettavata cham hehi sambadang punya sampadang. Sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Ettavata cham hehi sambadang punya sampadang. Sabbe sattanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you. And on behalf of the monks and Committee of Management of Buddhist Mahavihara, we would like to thank Bante Dr. Chandana for coming here to share with us your knowledge and with the audience despite the time zone. It's morning right now. I thank you very much. And also thank you to all our sponsors for the kind donation. And thank you to all our viewers for staying with us for almost 2 hours right now to learn and hear Dharma from Bante. Thank you, everyone, and I wish you all a pleasant and safe evening and Sukhi Hotu.
Sukhi Hot.